Hello everybody. For this tutorial, I want to go over your depth of field exercise. For this exercise, you're supposed to shoot at least 10 images using shallow depth of field, which is a wide, a large f-stop, which is a small f-stop number. Be really careful when you shoot in shallow depth of field about the placement of your focus. It has to be really dead on what you want to be sharp. If not, it's going to be out of focus. I'd also have a couple recommendations for you as you create these. One thing is you could always just go through your f-stops, find the subject, and go through your f-stops and just make sure you change your shutter speeds to give you equivalent exposures and look and see what happens to the background and the sharpness of your image. So I've done this in a couple of these to give you some examples. I also want to give you a couple of tips, just to help you out. Of course, you want to shoot in manual mode. And I usually use like ISO 400. It's right in the middle. That should help me in most predicaments. I would recommend shooting outdoors. If you're indoors, you probably really are going to need a tripod, and it's going to be very, very helpful to have a tripod outdoors too. I would get approximately at least like a foot or so from your subject when you're photographing these, and make sure there's something behind the subject. Maybe it's 6 inches away or a foot away. You really don't want to photograph something where everything is really, really far away, because you want something that has a subject and some kind of background that you can see a change in sharpness to. Your lens choices will affect your depth of field some. You might want to just use one focal length and kind of stick with it. And I'd recommend using something around a 50 millimeter. And one thing you really don't want to do is change your focus. This is something a lot of people mistakenly do when they're doing this project. For this instance, you focused on the flower, or I did here at f4 at 400th of a second, and then when I shot it at at the next setting, I had refocused my camera and shot at f11. So when you're doing this, you never want to change your focus between your two shots. You want to leave your focus the same. That's where it helps to shoot in manual mode, manual focus, and do not refocus your picture. Another problem you might have is when you're using your smallest aperture setting, and you're also to create 10 of those creating great depth of field, you want to be careful with your shutter speed. And if you're not using a tripod, you'll have this problem a lot if you're not careful with camera shake. So the rule of thumb is you want to use a shutter speed equal or faster than your millimeter on your lens. So I'm actually using 105 millimeter here. So I really need to shoot around 100th of a second. Now there's some tricks to help you prevent camera shake. One thing is just kind of keeping your elbows kind of locked into your chest and hold your breath when you're taking a picture. Or you could also lean against something such as a tree, or put your elbows on the ground. But you want to try to create almost like a tripod with your arms, using your elbows locked to kind of hold your camera steady. So there's tricks to that. I don't use a tripod a whole lot, but there's predicaments where I get into where I really need one, and I'm kind of limited to what I can do with my depth of field and my shutter speeds because I don't have a tripod. So I usually always have one handy. So I would recommend, if you have one, to use it. So and also when you take these, I would just have fun with it. I just went on a walk around the park near my house, and I just kind of explored and saw what looked interesting to me. If I saw something, I'd stop and take a picture of it, and walk on and make it kind of an adventure, make it something fun that you enjoy doing. So this is the first picture I took, and what I've done with these is I want you to also notice how my exposures stay the same as I shoot these, and that means they're equally bright or dark as the previous picture or the one after it. So when I change my aperture setting, I'm also changing my shutter speed to make up for that change in light. So if I'm making a larger diagram of my aperture, I'm using a slower shutter speed to make up for that. So keep that in mind. So this is the first picture. I shot it at f1.4 at 2,000ths of a second. And I want you to notice how there's really nothing really tack sharp in this picture. It does have some interesting looking bokeh back here. I like this. It's kind of cool looking. but there's no sharpness at all. So this camera is shooting right as largest aperture it can at its widest f-stop, but it's a little too much. So if I go into 1.8, now we notice where the edges of the flower are a little bit sharper. And if I go to 2.8, and this is probably a little bit more acceptable now. Now I have something sharp in the picture. So when you're shooting at these really wide f-stops, you want to make sure something is sharp. I would always look for something sharp in the picture unless you're just really going for some artistic look. And for an exercise like this, you probably want to demonstrate that you can use focus and you can see a difference in your background as you change. So this is like what I'm telling you. Notice how the background stays about the same color, the same luminance level. But look how my background starts getting sharper as I go. So here's f4. Here's f5.6, and as you're doing that, noticing how my shutter speeds are doubling in duration as I'm having my aperture setting. So here's 5.6, a 60th at f8, a 30th at f11, and a 15th at f16. Now what this is allowing me to do is it's giving me a lot more choices when I'm taking pictures. I can, if I want my subject to really come out of my picture and not have the background distracting, I would probably want to shoot something like this. But maybe my background is helping to tell a story about my picture and I want to use the background. Maybe there's dead flowers behind this one live flower, or it's covered in, caterpillars or something behind it. I probably would want to use a deeper depth of field to illustrate that. And a lot of times you're picking something kind of in the middle. Maybe you like the look of f4. You don't always want to shoot at extremes, but I would try it in this project just to see the differences and maybe shoot a couple in between aperture settings too. So like I said, f1.4, not so good. We get it to 2.8, now we got something that's usable, and now we start noticing how the background gets sharper. Okay, here's another example, shot at 2.8 at 1,000th. Now if I go to f4, my shutter speed is going to be 500ths of a second, 5.6 at 250, f8 at 125, f11 at 60th, and then f16 at 30th. Now this image, the background starts becoming a little bit more distracting. You could tell it's in front of a house. I don't know if that's really helping me tell a story or not. What I want it to do, but it's kind of up to you. And placement is also important. I might like this a little bit better, but I might want to use a different angle where I can crop out this fence porch railing altogether and not even show that area in the picture. Here's another example. Now I just want to show you in this one how using that smaller aperture number with that wide f-stop, how I can get into trouble. So again, I'm not using a tripod. At a 1/4 of a second, at a 3/20th of a second, at f4, I froze a bug on this flower. I like this part of the picture, the background, where I got like an area that's a little bit brighter, that's green. At f8, still looks okay. f10, I'm starting to get a little bit more detail in the background. And then at f13, I'm shooting at 30th of a second, I'm getting a little camera shake. So this picture isn't really usable, and especially when I go to f22. Now this is another enemy for you on this project, is I had some wind blowing, and the wind was my major concern with the slower shutter speed. So now I also have motion blur with a little camera shake, and it doesn't usually make a good combination. But I would just go around, find something if it's outside your house or a park, shoot some pictures at a large aperture setting, just f4, and then take another picture at f22. So again, the big thing to remember is to turn that shutter speed dial to get a equivalent exposure. So you want that needle back in the middle with your camera. And then pick and see which one you like better. I would go back and shoot a bunch of these and then pick out your 10 favorite shallow depth of field pictures with a wide f-stop, and then pick out your 10 greater depth of field pictures with a small f-stop. I'd look at your metadata somehow and make sure you can tell the difference between the two. Here's another example. Here's one at f4, and here's one at f22. And you can just see a difference in the two in the background with this one. Now since I'm so close to this tree, this isn't going to be tack sharp back here. but it is definitely sharper than this one where all I have is a little bit of the bark in focus. So here I have more of the tree in focus, but I still have shallow depth of field. And why I'm getting at is because really it's because of my focal length on my lens and also how close I am to my subject. Here's a couple more examples. F4 versus F22. Here's another one where the background becomes quite distracting whenever I close the aperture down. Here's one at F4 and here's another one at F22. The problem I'm having here is my focus is like right in this little area, but I probably need a little bit more depth of field so I have more of the leaf in focus. So you can see my line of focus as it comes across here, but it does not go very far back. So this one's almost unusable because of that, because I barely have any of the leaf in focus. Whereas this one, is a little bit better. I can see the whole leaf and I can see the background. So maybe I'd want to pick a deeper depth of field picture for this one. Here's another example at F4 and then F22. F4 and F22. Again, it's going to be more of your personal pick, which one you like better. I kind of like this one. I like being able to see into the water and see the detail into it. Where here it's a little bit more a shallow depth of field at F4, and I can't see much detail down there. And then here's another one at F4 and then F22. Just trying to this is a great tool to understand it. This gives you all these decisions you can make now about your pictures. You can decide if you want the background sharp, or if you want it blurred, if you want your subject to really stand out. But just keep in mind when you're shooting your wide f-stops, make sure there's something that's in focus when you take that initial picture, because if not, it's going to be hard to get something that's going to be usable.